Before I begin, I want to thank you for tuning in. I've debated sharing this for a while, but I think some stories need to be told, if only to remind us that even when you feel pushed to the edge, you can find your way back, and sometimes, you can even make sure those who pushed you understand the view from down there. My story starts with a long drive, a car full of carefully chosen Christmas presents, and a heart full of hope. It ends with those gifts in a dumpster, and a resolve I never knew I possessed. They thought I was just a silly old woman, easily dismissed. They were wrong. This is how I made my son and daughter-in-law regret the day they threw my love away with the trash. Let me know in the comments if you've ever felt so completely taken for granted. The biting December wind seemed to seep right through the old sedan's heater, but I barely noticed it. My hands, gnarled with a touch of arthritis, gripped the steering wheel a little tighter than necessary, a habit born of years of navigating life's less predictable roads. This road, however, was familiar. 500 miles. 500 miles I drove every Christmas, and often for birthdays and a summer visit too, to see my son, Michael, his wife, Sarah, and my 2 grandchildren, Lily and Tom. This year, the car was packed fuller than usual. I'd spent months knitting intricate sweaters for the children. Lily's a soft lavender with tiny embroidered flowers. Tom's a deep forest green, with a cable knit pattern I knew he'd find cool. For Michael, a first edition of a book by his favorite author, sourced from a dusty old shop an hour from my home. For Sarah, a delicate silver locket I'd found at an estate sale, something I thought was timeless and elegant, much like the woman I once believed her to be, or perhaps hoped she would become. I even had a batch of my famous gingerbread cookies, the ones Michael used to devour by the dozen as a boy, their spicy scent mingling with the pine of a small, handmade wreath I'd tucked into a box. Each gift was chosen with care, wrapped with love, a testament to the affection I held for them, an affection that often felt like a one-way street these days, but one I stubbornly refused to close off. My own little house, the one I'd lived in since my dear Arthur passed away 10 years prior, felt emptier each year, and these trips were a lifeline, a connection to the family that was supposed to be my world. I'd downsized after Arthur, sold the larger family home, and given Michael a substantial portion of the proceeds to help him and Sarah with the down payment on their sprawling suburban house, the very house I was now driving towards. It's an investment in your future, and mine, to see you settled and happy, I'd told him, and he'd hugged me, promising I'd always have a place with them. A promise that, like cheap paint, had begun to fade and chip over time. The drive was long, and as the miles ticked by, I allowed myself to dream of their faces when they opened their presents, of the children's laughter, of that warm, cozy feeling of belonging that Christmas was supposed to bring. I'd even bought a new, slightly more festive blouse for Christmas dinner, wanting to look my best, to feel a part of their vibrant, bustling life. The sun was setting as I finally pulled into their driveway, casting long, eerie shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn. The house was ablaze with lights, a picture of holiday cheer, but no one came out to greet me. A small twinge of disappointment, quickly suppressed. They were busy, of course. Christmas Eve was always hectic. I fumbled with my keys, my back aching from the drive, and began the process of unloading. The largest box, containing the sweaters and the book, was awkward, and I struggled with it up the porch steps. As I reached for the doorbell, I noticed the lid of their large, industrial-sized trash bin, the kind the city provides, was slightly ajar. It was right by the garage, a little out of the way. Something colorful caught my eye. A flash of lavender. My heart gave a strange, painful lurch. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the fading light, perhaps some of Sarah's discarded craft supplies. But an inexplicable dread pulled me towards it. I set the heavy box down on the porch, my breath catching in my throat, and walked over to the bin. With trembling fingers, I lifted the lid. There, nestled amongst coffee grounds, vegetable peelings, and discarded junk mail, were my gifts. Not just one or two. All of them. Lily's lavender sweater was stained with something dark. Tom's green one was crumpled at the bottom. Michael's rare book had a smear of what looked like spaghetti sauce across its cover. And Sarah's silver locket, still in its little velvet box, lay open, glinting mockingly up at me from a bed of orange peels. Even the gingerbread cookies, still in their festive tin, had been tossed in, the tin dented on one side. It was so blatant, so utterly contemptuous, that for a moment, I couldn't breathe. It felt like a physical blow, knocking all the air from my lungs, all the warmth from my body. The 500-mile drive, the months of careful selection and crafting, the lifetime of love I'd poured into being a mother and grandmother, all of it, reduced to garbage. I stood there, the cold wind whipping my hair around my face, staring into that bin, and a coldness far deeper than the December air began to settle into my bones. This wasn't just an oversight. This wasn't a mistake. This was a message, as clear and as cruel as any words they could have spoken. The carefully constructed facade of family devotion I'd clung to for so long shattered into a million pieces, right there beside their overflowing trash. The shock was a living thing, coiling in my stomach, stealing the strength from my legs. I leaned against the cold plastic of the bin, feeling dizzy, the scene before me blurring as unshed tears pricked at my eyes. How could they? How could Michael, my son, the little boy whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose nightmares I'd soothed, whose dreams I'd nurtured with every fiber of my being, allow this? And Sarah, who always presented such a polished, perfect exterior, was this the reality of her heart? A place so cold it could discard affection with such ease. I reached in, my hand automatically going to the lavender sweater, my fingers brushing against the damp, stained wool. A wave of nausea washed over me. I pulled my hand back as if burned. I couldn't touch them. They were contaminated, not just by the refuse in the bin, but by the sheer, unadulterated cruelty of the act. My mind raced, trying to find an explanation, any explanation, other than the one staring me in the face. Had there been a misunderstanding? Did they think these were old things I was discarding? But no, the packages were clearly marked, wrapped in festive paper, tags bearing their names in my familiar handwriting. The locket box was pristine, save for its disgusting resting place. The book was obviously new. No, there was no mistake. This was deliberate. I heard the front door open, and Sarah's voice, sharp and impatient, called out, "Is someone out there? Michael, did you order a late delivery?" I couldn't face them. Not yet. The humiliation was too raw, too overwhelming. Quickly, silently, I closed the lid of the trash bin, the click of the plastic sounding like a gunshot in the sudden stillness. I turned and fled, stumbling back to my car, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The box I'd carried to the porch, the one with yet more carefully chosen tokens of my affection, I left it there, a silent, accusing monument to their callousness. I got into my car, my hands shaking so violently I could barely fit the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered to life, and without a backward glance, I reversed out of their driveway, the image of those discarded gifts seared into my memory. The 500-mile journey back was a blow of pain and disbelief. The Christmas carols playing softly on the radio seemed to mock me with their cheerful melodies of love and togetherness. Each lyric was a fresh stab to my already wounded heart. I thought of all the Christmases past, the sacrifices I'd made. The year Arthur was so ill, and I'd still managed to create a magical Christmas for a young Michael. The lean years, when I'd worked 2 jobs to ensure he had everything he needed, never letting him feel deprived. The way I'd welcome Sarah into the family, treating her like the daughter I'd never had, overlooking her occasional coolness, her subtle barbs, attributing them to her youth or her different upbringing. As the miles dissolved behind me, so did my illusions. This wasn't an isolated incident, a momentary lapse in judgment. This was the culmination of years of subtle disrespect, of being taken for granted, of being treated as an obligation rather than a cherished family member. I remembered the Easters I'd driven down, only to find they'd made other plans, and forgotten to tell me, leaving me to spend the holiday alone in a sterile motel room. The birthdays where my calls went to voicemail, followed by a perfunctory text message days later. The times I'd offered to help with the children, only to be told I was too old-fashioned, or that my ways were interfering. Each memory, previously dismissed or explained away, now clicked into place, forming a sickening mosaic of their indifference. They hadn't just thrown away some presents, they had thrown me away, piece by piece, over a long and painful period. The gifts in the trash were merely the final, undeniable confirmation. It was the casual cruelty of it that stung the most. They hadn't even bothered to hide them, to dispose of them discreetly. They'd simply tossed them out, as if my efforts, my feelings, were utterly worthless. Did they laugh as they did it? Did Sarah sneer at the handmade sweaters? Did Michael, my Michael, even feel a moment's hesitation before consigning my love to the garbage heap? The questions tormented me, each one a fresh twist of the knife. By the time I pulled into my own dark, empty driveway, the first fragile snowflakes of what would become a Christmas blizzard were beginning to fall. My house, usually a haven, felt cold and unwelcoming. I didn't bother to turn on the lights. I sank onto the sofa, the chill of the unheated room seeping into my bones, mirroring the ice that had formed around my heart. The grief was immense, a tidal wave threatening to pull me under. But beneath the grief, something else was stirring. A tiny ember of anger, of indignation. I had poured my life, my resources, my love into that family. I had given Michael a significant sum for their house, money from the sale of the home I'd shared with his father, money that represented my security, my future. It was given freely, out of love, but with the implicit understanding of family loyalty, of mutual care. An understanding they had now so flagrantly, so painfully, violated. The image of the lavender sweater, stained and discarded, flashed in my mind again. And with it, a new, steely resolve began to form. They thought I was old, weak, easily dismissed. They thought I would simply absorb this latest cruelty, perhaps shed a few tears, and then come crawling back, desperate for whatever scraps of attention they might deign to throw my way. They didn't know me at all. The love was still there, a deep, aching wound, but it was now overshadowed by a profound sense of betrayal. And betrayal, I was beginning to realize, demanded more than just sorrow. It demanded justice. The next few days were a desolate landscape of grief and fury. Christmas Day itself was the worst. The phone never rang. No guilty calls from Michael, no awkward apologies from Sarah. Just silence, thick and suffocating, amplifying the emptiness of my small house. I'd made a modest Christmas dinner for myself, a small roasted chicken and some vegetables, but the food tasted like ash in my mouth. Every carol on the radio, every festive commercial on television, was a fresh torment. The image of those gifts in the trash was a constant, unwelcome guest, replaying in my mind's eye with brutal clarity. But as the initial shock wore off, and the raw pain began to dull into a persistent ache, something else started to take root. A cold, hard anger. It wasn't the explosive, fleeting kind, but a slow-burning fire in the pit of my stomach. It was the anger of a woman who had given everything and received contempt in return. It was the anger of a mother whose love had been trampled upon. It was the anger of a person whose dignity had been assaulted. I started to think, really think, about my relationship with Michael and Sarah, not through the rose-tinted glasses of maternal affection, but with the clear, unflinching gaze of someone who has been profoundly wronged. The Christmas incident wasn't an aberration, it was a symptom of a deeper malaise. I recalled countless instances of their selfishness, their casual disregard for my feelings. The way they'd borrowed money over the years, small sums at first, then larger ones, always with vague promises of repayment that never materialized. The way Sarah would make snide remarks about my clothes, my opinions, even the way I kept my house, always disguised as helpful suggestions, the way Michael, who used to be so considerate, had slowly morphed into a passive bystander in his own life, allowing Sarah's sharper, more critical nature to dominate their interactions with me. And then there was the house. Their large, comfortable house. My house, in a way. Or at least, a significant portion of it was built on the foundation of my generosity. I had sold the family home I shared with Arthur, the place where Michael grew up, because it was too big for me alone, and because they were struggling to get a foothold in the prohibitively expensive property market. I'd given them nearly 60% of the proceeds, the sum that would be worth a small fortune now, as an outright gift for their down payment. No strings attached, my dear, I'd said to Michael, just be happy, and remember your old mum sometimes. He'd been so grateful then, or so it had seemed. He'd sworn I'd always have a room, a welcome. That money, I realized with a jolt, was not just a gift. It was my security, my legacy from Arthur, and I had handed it over with trusting naivety. And what had that trust bought me? A pile of my heartfelt gifts rotting in their garbage. That was the turning point. The moment the sorrow and the anger coalesced into a single, sharp point of resolve. Enough. I would not be their emotional punching bag, their forgotten ATM, their inconvenient elderly relative to be placated with occasional, condescending gestures. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness, my patience for foolishness. They had underestimated me. Profoundly. I stood up from the sofa, the stiffness in my joints a reminder of the years I'd spent caregiving, first for my own parents, then for Arthur, and in many ways, for Michael. My reflection in the darkened window showed a woman I barely recognized, her face etched with grief, yes, but with a new, unfamiliar hardness in her eyes. The soft, accommodating Eleanor was gone, or perhaps she was merely in hibernation. In her place was someone else, someone I was only just beginning to meet. Someone who understood that sometimes, the only way to reclaim your dignity is to demand it, unequivocally. The path ahead wasn't clear yet, but the destination was. I would not let this go. I would not allow them to simply sweep this under the rug, to eventually offer some flimsy excuse and expect me to forgive and forget. Forgiveness was a bridge too far, at least for now. What I needed was restitution, not just for the discarded gifts, but for the years of disregard, for the casual theft of my peace of mind and my financial security. They had drawn a line in the sand with their cruelty. Now, I would draw my own. The decision to act, once made, brought a strange sense of calm. The churning emotions of the past few days settled, replaced by a focused determination. My first practical thought was of the money, the substantial sum I'd given Michael and Sarah for their house. It had been presented as a gift, yes, but were there any records? Any correspondence that might reframe it, or at least highlight the understanding of familial support that they had so spectacularly betrayed? I spent the next few days in a flurry of quiet activity, a stark contrast to my previous inertia. I went through old boxes in the attic, files I hadn't looked at in years. My late husband, Arthur, had been a meticulous record keeper, a trait I had sometimes found exasperating, but for which I was now profoundly grateful. I found old bank statements showing the transfer of funds from the sale of our family home directly to an account Michael had opened for the house purchase. I found a copy of a letter I'd written to Michael around that time, full of motherly advice and hopes for his future, in which I'd mentioned the money as helping them secure the family home where, I hope, many happy memories will be made, and where your old mum will always feel welcome. Not a legally binding contract, perhaps, but it painted a picture. I even found a thank you card from Michael and Sarah, effusive in its gratitude, gushing about how they never could have managed it without me, and how they owed me everything. Owed me. An interesting choice of words, in retrospect. The more I dug, the more a plan began to form, nebulous at first, then slowly coming into sharper focus. This wasn't just about recouping money. It was about respect. It was about consequences. They needed to understand that actions, especially cruel and dismissive ones, have repercussions. I knew I couldn't do this alone. My knowledge of legal matters was rudimentary at best. I needed professional advice, someone who could guide me through the complexities of the situation, someone who would understand not just the legalities, but the emotional devastation I was experiencing. I thought of old Mrs. Henderson from my church, who had gone through a nasty dispute with her son over property a few years back. She had spoken highly of her lawyer, a woman named Monica Brewster, who specialized in family law and estate matters, known for being both compassionate and fiercely intelligent. The name stuck with me. Monica. It sounded strong, capable. The following Monday, after a weekend spent steeling my nerves and organizing my thoughts and documents into a coherent narrative, I picked up the phone and made an appointment. The receptionist was polite, efficient, and scheduled me for a consultation later that week. Hanging up, I felt a surge of adrenaline, a mixture of trepidation and a strange, empowering sense of purpose. This was it. I was taking the first concrete step. There was no turning back. As I waited for the appointment, I found myself observing the world with a newfound clarity. The saccharine Christmas decorations still lingering in shop windows seemed almost offensive. The casual pleasantries of strangers felt superficial. I was moving through a world that suddenly felt sharper, less forgiving, but also more real. I rehearsed what I would say to Monica Brewster, going over the details in my mind, trying to present the facts calmly and rationally, despite the storm of emotion still raging within me. I laid out the bank statements, the letter, the thank you card, on my small dining table, a poignant collection of evidence detailing a trust betrayed. I also wrote down a clear account of the Christmas Eve incident, from the long drive to the horrifying discovery in the trash bin, sparing no detail of the gifts or my emotional reaction. I needed Ms. Brewster to understand the depth of the wound, the profound disrespect that had finally pushed me to this point. This wasn't about greed, it was about reclaiming a part of myself they had tried to discard along with those lovingly chosen presents. It was about ensuring my remaining years would be lived with dignity, on my own terms, not as a footnote in their increasingly self-absorbed lives. The old Eleanor, the one who would have wept and perhaps eventually forgiven, was fading. A new Eleanor, one forged in the crucible of betrayal and disappointment, was slowly, resolutely, taking her place. The day of my appointment with Monica Brewster dawned grey and drizzly, mirroring my somber mood, yet beneath it lay a current of nervous anticipation. Her office was in a restored Victorian building downtown, tastefully decorated, exuding an air of quiet professionalism that I found reassuring. Monica herself was younger than I expected, perhaps in her late 40s, with kind, intelligent eyes and a calm, attentive demeanor. She listened patiently as I recounted my story, starting with the Christmas Eve discovery, the shock, the humiliation, the drive home in a daze of grief. I laid out the presents, metaphorically speaking, item by item, explaining the thought and love that had gone into each one, only for them to end up in the refuse. Her expression remained compassionate, but neutral as I spoke, her gaze never wavering. Then, I moved on to the larger context, the significant financial contribution to their house, the years of smaller financial loans that were never repaid, the escalating pattern of disrespect and disregard. I handed her the folder containing my meticulously organized documents, the bank statements, the copy of my letter to Michael, their effusive thank you card. She examined each one carefully, her brow furrowing slightly as she read my words and then theirs. When I finally finished, a heavy silence filled the room, broken only by the gentle hum of the computer on her desk. I felt emotionally drained, as if I'd run a marathon. "Mrs. Davies," Monica said, her voice soft but firm, "thank you for sharing this with me. What you've described is not just a matter of discarded gifts, it's a profound breach of trust and, frankly, a display of astonishing cruelty and disrespect." Her validation was like a balm to my wounded spirit. For weeks, I had been questioning myself, wondering if I was overreacting, if I was being too sensitive. To hear a legal professional, a stranger, affirm the gravity of their actions was immensely reassuring. "Legally speaking," she continued, "reclaiming a gift, especially one made years ago for a property purchase, can be complex. Gifts are generally considered irrevocable. However," she paused, tapping a pen against the thank you card, "the language used here, 'we owe you everything,' coupled with the clear evidence of the source of the funds and your letter outlining your expectations of it being a family home, where you would always be welcome, could potentially be argued as creating a situation of unjust enrichment, especially given their subsequent conduct which effectively revokes that welcome." She explained that while a direct clawback of the gifted money for the house might be an uphill battle, if it was purely documented as a gift with no strings, their behavior could be seen as a fundamental repudiation of the familial understanding upon which such a significant gift was implicitly based. "What is it you hope to achieve, Mrs. Davies?" Monica asked gently. I took a deep breath. "I don't want to destroy them," I said, and it was true. Despite my anger, the thought of Michael utterly ruined still caused a pang. But I cannot let this stand. They need to understand the consequences of treating me this way. I want them to feel the impact of their actions. And frankly, Monica, that money I gave them, it represents my security. With Arthur gone, it was a significant portion of my nest egg. I gave it generously, believing in family. Now, I feel foolish and vulnerable. I explained how their actions had made me question my own future financial stability. "Perhaps," I continued, my voice gaining strength, "they need to buy me out of my investment in their lives, an investment they've clearly devalued. Or maybe there's a way to secure a formal acknowledgement of that sum as a loan, with a repayment plan. Something that makes them accountable." Monica nodded slowly. "There are several avenues we could explore. A strongly worded legal letter outlining your grievances, and demanding a formal discussion about the funds you provided could be a first step. We can highlight the moral and ethical breach, and imply that their actions could be seen as grounds for seeking restitution due to a frustration of the implicit terms of your generosity, namely, continued familial respect and inclusion." She explained the concept of a constructive trust, where the court might impose an obligation on them if it could be proven they were unjustly enriched at my expense under circumstances that made it inequitable for them to retain the benefit without repayment, especially given their conduct. "The Christmas incident," she said, "while emotionally devastating, also serves as powerful evidence of their current disregard for your well-being and your relationship, which is relevant to the spirit of your gift." We talked for nearly 2 hours. Monica outlined potential strategies, the costs involved, and the possible reactions from Michael and Sarah. She was realistic about the challenges, but also quietly confident that we had grounds to pursue a resolution that would, at the very least, force them to confront their behavior and potentially make financial amends. As I left her office, the drizzly rain had stopped, and a sliver of pale sunshine was breaking through the clouds. I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The burden I had been carrying alone now felt shared. I had an ally, a plan. The path ahead was still fraught with uncertainty, but for the first time since that horrific Christmas Eve, I felt a flicker of hope, not for reconciliation, but for justice. The fight had just begun, but I was no longer just a grieving mother. I was a woman with a purpose, armed with evidence and expert counsel. The weeks that followed my consultation with Monica were a period of quiet, intense preparation. Monica had advised that our first formal move should be a meticulously crafted letter, laying out my position, the history of my financial support, and the unacceptable nature of their recent behavior, culminating in a demand for a formal discussion about financial restitution. To make this letter as impactful as possible, she needed every piece of corroborating evidence I could find. So, I delved deeper into my past, not just for documents, but for memories, conversations, anything that could substantiate the understanding or misunderstanding surrounding the money I'd given for their house. It was an emotionally taxing process. Each old bank statement, each photograph from happier times now tinged with irony, each remembered promise from Michael, felt like reopening a wound. But with each piece of evidence, my resolve hardened. I recalled conversations with Michael before he married Sarah, where he'd expressed anxieties about ever affording a family home. I remembered saying, "Don't worry, son. When the time comes, your father and I will make sure you have a good start." Family helps family. After Arthur passed, and I sold our larger home, I had reiterated that promise specifically in relation to the proceeds. I even found an old email exchange with Michael where he'd sent me listings for houses, and I'd replied, "That one looks lovely, dear. Remember, the money from King Street is there for you when you find the right place." It wasn't a loan document, but it clearly linked my funds to their future home. Sarah, in those early days, had been cloyingly sweet, full of praise for my generosity. I found a birthday card she'd given me a year after they bought the house, with a handwritten note, "Dearest Eleanor, we think of you every day, and how your incredible kindness made this beautiful home possible for us. We are eternally grateful, eternally grateful." The words mocked me from the cheap cardstock. Monica was particularly interested in any smaller, undocumented loans or gifts. I painstakingly went through years of my checkbook registers and online banking history. There were dozens of smaller transfers to Michael, $500 car repair, $300 kids summer camp, $1,000 dental bills. None of these had ever been acknowledged as loans, always vaguely termed as helping out, but they added up to a significant sum over a decade, further illustrating a pattern of financial dependence they had clearly come to take for granted. I documented everything, creating a spreadsheet with dates, amounts, and purposes, if I could recall them. Meanwhile, life, or what passed for it, continued. Michael and Sarah made a few attempts to contact me after Christmas. A voicemail from Michael, sounding strained and a little impatient. "Mum, where are you? We were expecting you." Lily and Tom kept asking. "Call me." No mention of the gifts, no apology, just an aggrieved tone, as if I were the one in the wrong. Sarah sent a brief, coolly worded text. "Eleanor, your disappearing act was very dramatic. If you're upset about something, you should have the decency to discuss it. We are worried, and frankly, a bit annoyed." Worried? Annoyed? The audacity was breathtaking. I didn't respond to either of them. On Monica's advice, any communication would now go through her. This silence, I knew, would be unsettling for them, especially for Michael, who, despite his recent behavior, still had a vestige of a conscience, however deeply buried. Sarah, I suspected, would simply be irritated by the loss of control. My silence was a new weapon, one they hadn't anticipated. I was no longer the predictable, ever-forgiving mother. During this period, I also took Monica's advice to look after myself. I started taking longer walks, reconnected with a couple of old friends I'd neglected, and even began tentatively planning a small trip for myself later in the year, something I'd always wanted to do, but had always put off for family obligations. It was a way of reclaiming my time, my energy, my focus. The planning of the legal strategy became my project, a task that required precision and clear thinking, and it was surprisingly empowering. I wasn't just wallowing in grief anymore. I was actively working towards a resolution. Each document found, each memory recorded, was a small victory, a step towards holding them accountable. Monica and I had several more meetings, refining the details of our approach. She was impressed with the thoroughness of my documentation. "Eleanor," she said during one session, "you would have made an excellent paralegal. Your attention to detail is remarkable." Coming from her, it was high praise, and it made me feel a small sense of pride. The old Eleanor might have been easily flustered by legal jargon, but this new Eleanor was learning, adapting, growing stronger with each passing day. We were building a case, not just on legal principles, but on a foundation of meticulously recorded truth. And the truth, I was beginning to believe, had a power all its own. The day Monica finally sent the letter was a Tuesday. I remember because the postman had just delivered a seed catalogue, and I was idly flipping through it, dreaming of a spring garden, when Monica called. "It's done, Eleanor," she said, her voice calm and professional. "The letter has been sent by registered mail to Michael and Sarah. It outlines everything we discussed, your substantial financial contributions, the implicit understandings surrounding those contributions, their pattern of disregard, the deeply offensive incident on Christmas Eve, and our request for a formal meeting to discuss substantial financial restitution. We've given them 14 days to respond through their legal counsel." A wave of conflicting emotions washed over me, relief that the first official step had been taken, anxiety about their reaction, and a grim satisfaction that the ball was now in their court. "Thank you, Monica," I managed, my voice a little shaky. "Thank you for everything. Now we wait, Eleanor," she replied. "Try not to dwell on it too much. They will react, and it will likely be emotional. But we are prepared." Waiting was easier said than done. Every ring of the phone made me jump. I rehearsed conversations in my head, anticipating their outrage, their denial, their attempts at manipulation. I knew Michael would be shocked. He had always seen me as soft, easily swayed by an emotional appeal. Sarah, I predicted, would be furious, viewing this as an attack on her comfortable lifestyle, the one I had unwittingly subsidized for so long. The first indication that the letter had arrived came 3 days later. It wasn't a call from a lawyer. It was Michael, appearing unannounced on my doorstep. I saw his car pull up through the lace curtains of my living room window, and my heart leaped into my throat. He looked agitated, his face flushed, his hair disheveled, a stark contrast to his usual well-groomed appearance. He practically pounded on the door. I took a deep breath, reminding myself of Monica's advice: remain calm, refer him to her, do not get drawn into an argument. I opened the door just a crack, leaving the security chain on. "Michael," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "What are you doing here?" His eyes, bloodshot and angry, bored into mine. "What am I doing here?" he sputtered, waving a piece of paper Monica's letter in his hand. "What in God's name is this, Mum? Have you lost your mind? Lawyers? Restitution? Are you trying to destroy us?" The accusation, so swift, so devoid of any self-awareness, stung, but I held my ground. "Michael," I said coolly, "this is a legal matter now. You need to have your solicitor contact Ms. Brewster. Her details are in the letter." "Solicitor? Ms. Brewster?" He scoffed, a harsh, ugly sound. I'm not talking to any damn solicitor. I'm talking to my mother. Or at least, the woman I thought was my mother. How could you do this? After everything you've given us. The irony of that last statement seemed completely lost on him. Precisely, Michael, I replied, my voice hardening. After everything I've given you. And how was that generosity repaid? By my Christmas gifts being thrown in the trash. By years of being treated like an inconvenience. His face changed then. A flicker of something shame. Guilt crossed his features before being quickly replaced by renewed anger. Oh, so this is about those stupid presents, he exclaimed, as if that were triviality. Sarah said you'd be dramatic about that. It was a mistake, okay. A misunderstanding. The kids were helping clean up before you arrived, things got mixed up, a blatant, pathetic lie. The children were 10 and 12, hardly old enough to be orchestrating such a thorough and targeted disposal of wrapped gifts from the back of my car before I'd even brought them in. And even if it were true, where was the immediate apology? The frantic call on Christmas Day. A misunderstanding that involved every single gift I brought, Michael. I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm I didn't know I possessed. Including the one still in my car, which you presumably rummaged through before I even got out. Please. Spare me the insults to my intelligence. He looked taken aback by my tone, by my refusal to crumble. Sarah thought some of it was. Well, stuff you were getting rid of, he stammered, his argument weakening. She didn't mean any harm, then Sarah can explain that to Ms. Brewster, I said firmly. I am not discussing this with you further, Michael. You and Sarah need to get legal advice. This is not a game. He stared at me, his anger deflating into a bewildered frustration. I don't understand, Mum. Why are you doing this? We're family. You and Sarah seem to have a very convenient definition of family, Michael, I said, the words heavy with years of disappointment. One that involves taking, but not much giving, and certainly very little respect. Now, please leave. Any further communication must go through my lawyer. I started to close the door. He put his hand out, as if to stop me. Mum, please. Don't do this. Think about Lily and Tom. Think about what this will do to them, the emotional blackmail, right on cue. It was a low blow, and for a moment, it almost worked. The thought of my grandchildren caught in the middle was painful. But then I remembered their faces, eager and innocent, and I knew this wasn't about hurting them. It was about teaching their parents a lesson in decency, a lesson they clearly wouldn't learn any other way. And perhaps, in the long run, it would even be better for Lily and Tom to see that their grandmother had self-respect, that she wouldn't be treated like dirt. I am thinking about them, Michael, I said quietly. And I'm thinking about myself, for a change. Goodbye. I closed the door, firmly engaging the deadbolt. I leaned against it, my legs trembling, but my resolve intact. The first confrontation was over. It had been awful, but I hadn't backed down. The legal machinery was in motion, and they were finally, belatedly, starting to understand that I was serious. The fight was far from over, but I had held my line. Michael's dramatic appearance was followed by an unnerving silence for nearly a week. I imagined frantic discussions happening in their house, perhaps disbelief giving way to panic as the implications of Monica's letter sank in. Then, as predicted, a formal letter arrived at Monica's office from a law firm, Messrs. Grantham, Stowe and Howe, representing Michael and Sarah Davies. Monica called me immediately. They've lawyered up, Eleanor, she said, a note of satisfaction in her voice. It's a good sign. It means they are taking us seriously. Their solicitor is a Mr. Alastair Finch. He's known to be a bit of a bulldog, but competent. The letter from Mr. Finch was, as Monica put it, predictably dismissive, but stopping short of outright aggression. It acknowledged receipt of our correspondence, denied any malicious intent regarding the Christmas gifts, attributing it to an unfortunate mishap during festive preparations, and stated that my financial contributions to their home were unequivocally gifts, made with no expectation of repayment, and that any suggestion otherwise was an opportunistic and regrettable attempt to rewrite history. It did, however, propose a, without prejudice, meeting to discuss the unfortunate breakdown in family relations, clearly an attempt to gauge our seriousness, and perhaps offer some token gesture to make me go away. Standard opening gambit, Monica explained. They are testing the waters, trying to downplay everything. Mr. Finch is trying to frame you as emotional and unreasonable. Our response will be to reiterate our position firmly and to push for a concrete discussion about the financial settlement we are seeking based on the principle of unjust enrichment and the clear frustration of the goodwill upon which your generosity was predicated over the next few weeks. A series of letters and emails volleyed back and forth between Monica and Mr. Finch. He tried to stall, to obfuscate, to paint Michael and Sarah as victims of an ungrateful and vindictive elderly mother. Monica, calm and methodical, countered every point with meticulously documented evidence and unshakable legal reasoning. She emphasized that the Christmas incident was not an isolated mishap, but the culmination of a long-standing pattern of behavior, providing an anonymized summary of the smaller financial drains and the consistent disrespect I had endured. She reiterated that while the initial sum for the house was indeed a gift, it was given with the implicit understanding of continued family bonds and mutual respect, an understanding that Michael and Sarah had systematically violated, thus nullifying the spirit, if not the letter, of the gift. She made it clear we weren't just seeking an apology, we were seeking a substantial financial readjustment to reflect the value of my contribution to their primary asset, an asset they now enjoyed while treating the benefactor with contempt. The stress was immense. There were days I doubted myself, wondered if I should just drop it, let them keep the money, and retreat into a quiet, lonely existence. The thought of dragging family matters through lawyers was distasteful. But then I would remember the sight of Lily's lavender sweater in the trash, the smugness in Sarah's text message, Michael's entitled anger at my door. And my resolve would harden again. Monica was my rock through this period. She'd call with updates, explain the legal jargon, and, most importantly, constantly reassure me that my feelings were valid and my case had merit. They underestimated you, Eleanor, she said one afternoon. They thought you'd just absorb this like you've absorbed so much else. Their solicitor is learning that mistake now. Eventually, Mr. Finch, likely realizing that Monica was not going to be easily intimidated or dismissed, agreed to a formal mediation session. This is where things will get interesting, Monica told me. They'll try to lowball us, to appeal to your emotions, to make you feel guilty. We need to stay firm on our target figure. We had calculated a sum that represented a significant portion of my initial contribution, adjusted for the appreciation in property value over the years. It was a figure that would undoubtedly be a shock to Michael and Sarah, likely requiring them to refinance their precious house or significantly alter their lifestyle. The mediation was scheduled to take place at a neutral venue, a suite of officers specializing in dispute resolution. I felt sick with nerves on the morning of the meeting. Seeing Michael and Sarah again, in such an adversarial context, was daunting. Monica, however, was the picture of calm confidence. Remember, Eleanor, she said as we drove to the venue, we hold the moral high ground here. And we have the facts on our side. Let me do most of the talking. Your strength will be in your quiet dignity. The mediation room was sterile and impersonal, dominated by a large mahogany table. Michael and Sarah were already there with Mr. Finch, a portly man with a condescending air. Sarah shot me a look of pure venom, her lips pressed into a thin, angry line. Michael wouldn't meet my eyes, staring fixedly at a point on the table. The mediator, a calm, older gentleman named Mr. Henderson, no relation to my church friend, ironically, introduced himself and outlined the process. The initial statements were predictable. Mr. Finch reiterated their position: the money was a gift, no strings attached. The Christmas incident was an unfortunate accident, blown out of proportion by an overly sensitive mother. He painted Michael and Sarah as loving, dutiful children, bewildered by my aggressive legal action. When it was Monica's turn, she was magnificent. Calmly, methodically, she laid out our case. She spoke of the significant financial sacrifice I had made, providing bank statements and correspondence that clearly showed the funds originating from the sale of my marital home. She detailed the years of smaller financial drains. Then, she addressed the Christmas incident, not as a singular event, but as the final, unbearable straw in a long line of disrespectful and dismissive behaviors. She spoke of the emotional toll this had taken on me. My client, Mrs. Davies, Monica stated, her voice firm but devoid of undue aggression, is not here out of vindictiveness. She is here because her trust was betrayed, her generosity abused, and her dignity assaulted. The gift that enabled Mr. and Mrs. Michael Davies to acquire their substantial home was predicated on an understanding of familial love, respect, and inclusion. Their actions, culminating in the despicable treatment of Mrs. Davies' Christmas offerings, have fundamentally repudiated that understanding. They have been unjustly enriched by retaining the full benefit of Mrs. Davies' generosity, while simultaneously discarding her from their lives in the most callous manner imaginable. She then presented our financial proposal, a sum that represented 60% of my original contribution, plus a modest interest to account for the years they had benefited from it. I saw Michael flinch. Sarah gasped audibly, her face turning a mottled red. "That's outrageous," Mr. Finch blustered. "Completely unreasonable. My clients simply do not have that kind of money. You are trying to bankrupt them." The mediator stepped in, attempting to lower the temperature. "Perhaps," he suggested, "Mr. and Mrs. Davies could express their regret for the Christmas incident and offer a sincere apology." Sarah snorted. "We already said it was a mistake. What more does she want?" Michael finally looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Mum, please. This is tearing the family apart. Can't we just forget all this? We can make it up to you. You can come for Easter, we'll have a lovely time." The offer was so inadequate, so utterly tone-deaf to the depth of the hurt, that I almost laughed. "Michael," I said, my voice quiet but clear, "this isn't about Easter dinner. This is about years of being taken for granted. This is about my gifts, my love, being thrown in a dumpster. An apology now, under duress, means nothing. What means something is accountability." Monica then presented the alternative. "If a lump sum is unmanageable," she said smoothly, "Mrs. Davies is prepared to consider a formal loan agreement, secured against their property, for the full amount of her original contribution, with a structured repayment plan over 10 years, at a fair market interest rate. This would, of course, involve a legal charge on their home." Sarah looked horrified. The idea of a charge on their precious house, a constant reminder of their debt to me, was clearly anathema to her. Mr. Finch began to argue about the impossibility of such terms, the hardship it would cause. The mediation dragged on for hours. They made a laughably small counteroffer, which Monica politely dismissed. There were moments when Michael looked genuinely distressed, caught between his wife's indignation and, perhaps, a dawning understanding of the mess they were in. Sarah, however, remained largely defiant, whispering furiously to Mr. Finch and glaring at me whenever she thought I wasn't looking. Finally, after much toing and froing, and separate caucus sessions with the mediator, Mr. Finch came back with a significantly improved offer, though still short of our initial figure. It would involve them taking out a second mortgage on their house. "My clients are prepared to offer this sum," Mr. Finch said, his voice strained, "as a full and final settlement, with no admission of liability, purely to resolve this unfortunate family dispute and to, hopefully, allow for some measure of healing." Monica looked at me. I gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't everything we'd asked for, but it was substantial. It was enough to make them feel the consequences, enough to restore my financial security, and enough to represent a significant moral victory. On the condition, Monica added smoothly, that Mrs. Davies also receives a written apology, drafted by Michael and Sarah personally, acknowledging the hurt caused by the Christmas incident and their subsequent lack of communication. Sarah looked like she was about to explode, but Michael, looking utterly defeated, just nodded mutely. Mr. Finch sighed. "We can agree to that." The deal was struck. As we left the mediation rooms, I caught Michael's eye. There was no triumph in my gaze, only a profound sadness for what had been irrevocably broken between us. He looked away, his shoulders slumped. Sarah swept past me without a word, her face a mask of cold fury. I knew then that any hope of a genuine reconciliation was gone. But as Monica and I walked out into the afternoon sun, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in months. It wasn't just about the money. It was about standing up for myself. It was about reclaiming my dignity from the trash heap where they had tried to leave it. The payback had been delivered, not with fiery vengeance, but with the cool, quiet force of justice. The weeks following the mediation settlement were a whirlwind of legal paperwork and financial transactions. Monica handled the complexities with her usual efficiency, ensuring that the agreement was watertight and that the funds were transferred correctly. Michael and Sarah had to scramble to arrange the second mortgage on their house. I imagined the strained conversations, the uncomfortable meetings with bank managers, the dawning reality of their new financial obligations. It wasn't my concern anymore. The sum, when it finally landed in my bank account, felt less like a windfall and more like the return of something that had been mine all along: my security, my peace of mind, a tangible representation of the respect I was due. The written apology arrived a few days later, delivered by courier. It was a single sheet of paper, jointly signed by Michael and Sarah. The wording was stiff, clearly drafted with a lawyer's cautious oversight, acknowledging regret for any distress caused by the unfortunate misunderstanding regarding the Christmas gifts, and expressing a hope for future amicable relations. It was a far cry from a heartfelt mea culpa, lacking any genuine remorse or understanding of the depth of their cruelty. Sarah's signature was a sharp, angry scrawl. Michael's was hesitant, almost illegible. I read it once, then filed it away. It was a necessary part of the settlement, but it held no emotional value for me. The true apology was in the financial consequence they now faced, in the disruption to their comfortable, entitled lives. With the legal battle concluded and my finances restored, a profound sense of relief washed over me. It was as if a heavy cloak I had been wearing for years had finally been lifted. The anger, which had been my constant companion for months, began to dissipate, leaving behind a quiet sadness for the son I had lost, or perhaps the son I had never truly had. But there was no bitterness. I had done what I needed to do. I had faced the betrayal head-on and emerged, not unscathed, but whole and with my dignity intact. My first major decision was to move. My small house, once a cozy haven, now felt tainted by the memories of that awful Christmas and the subsequent turmoil. It was also a constant reminder of my proximity to Michael and Sarah, a proximity I no longer desired. With the settlement funds, I had options I hadn't had before. I decided against buying another property immediately. Instead, I found a lovely, bright apartment in a managed retirement community in a coastal town about 100 miles away, far enough for a clean break, yet close enough that old friends could still visit if they wished. It was smaller, more manageable, with services and amenities that would make life easier as I grew older. Most importantly, it was mine, chosen by me, for me. The process of downsizing again was cathartic. I went through my belongings, keeping only what was truly precious or useful. Old photographs of Michael as a child brought a pang, but I packed them away carefully, not out of anger, but as relics of a past that was now firmly closed. I sold much of my furniture, using the proceeds to buy new, lighter pieces that suited the airy feel of my new apartment. As I packed, I found a small, forgotten box containing some of Arthur's old gardening tools and a few packets of seeds. A gentle idea began to form. The retirement community had allotments for residents. Perhaps it was time for Eleanor to cultivate her own garden, literally and figuratively. The day I moved, Monica came to see me off, bringing a bottle of champagne and a beautiful orchid. "To new beginnings, Eleanor," she said, her eyes warm with genuine affection. "You deserve every happiness." We'd formed a bond, she and I, forged in the fires of legal battle, and I knew I'd found a true friend and ally in her. My new apartment overlooked a beautifully maintained communal garden, and beyond it, I could just glimpse the sea. The air smelled fresh, tinged with salt. As the movers brought in the last of my boxes, I stood on my new balcony, breathing deeply. A sense of peace, profound and deeply earned, settled over me. There was still a scar on my heart where my son used to be, but it no longer ached with the same intensity. I was starting a new chapter, one where I was the sole author, and the theme was peace, independence, and quiet joy. The old Eleanor, the perpetual giver, the overlooked matriarch, was well and truly gone. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, who had fought for her dignity, and who was now ready to embrace whatever future awaited her with open arms and a content heart. Life in the coastal town unfolded with a gentle rhythm. My new apartment, filled with sunlight and the scent of the sea, quickly felt like home. I joined a book club at the community center, started attending gentle yoga classes, and, true to my nascent plan, secured a small allotment in the residence garden. My hands, once gnarled with the tension of unspoken grief and anger, now found solace in the soil, planting herbs, vegetables, and bright, cheerful flowers. There was a simple satisfaction in watching things grow, a tangible result of care and effort, so different from the emotional gardening I had tried to do with my family, which had yielded such bitter fruit. I made new friends, women and men of my own generation, with their own stories, their own wisdom. We shared meals, played cards, went for walks along the promenade. There was an easy camaraderie, a sense of shared experience without the heavy weight of familial obligation or expectation. For the first time in many, many years, I felt truly unburdened. I didn't hear directly from Michael or Sarah, and I made no effort to contact them. The silence was a balm. Occasionally, news would filter through indirectly. A distant cousin mentioned that Michael seemed stressed, and that they'd had to tighten their belts considerably. There was no triumph in hearing this, only a distant, objective acknowledgement that actions have consequences. Their choices had led them to this point, just as my choices were now leading me to a place of quiet contentment. I often thought about the lessons learned from the whole painful episode. The most profound was the importance of self-respect. For too long, I had allowed my desire for family connection to overshadow my own needs, my own worth. I had mistaken their acceptance of my generosity for love, their dependence for affection. The gifts in the trash, as brutal as they were, had been a necessary wake-up call, forcing me to see the reality of the situation rather than the idealized version I had clung to for so long. I learned that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, to reclaim your dignity, even when it means confronting those you once loved deeply. The legal battle had been draining, but it had also been empowering. It taught me that I was stronger, more resilient, and more capable than I had ever imagined. Monica remained a cherished friend. We spoke on the phone regularly, and she visited me a couple of times, enjoying the sea air and my burgeoning garden. She told me once, "Eleanor, you're an inspiration. So many people in your situation would have just accepted the injustice. You fought back, and you did it with grace and integrity." Her words meant more to me than she knew. One sunny afternoon, about a year after I'd moved, I was tending my small patch of tomatoes when one of my new friends, Margaret, a sprightly woman with a wicked sense of humor, came over. "Eleanor," she said, "there's a charity looking for volunteers to read to children at the local library. I thought of you. You have such a lovely, calm voice. A few years ago, the thought of interacting with children after what happened with my own grandchildren would have been painful. But now, it felt different. Lily and Tom were innocent in all of this, victims of their parents' flawed characters. Perhaps, I thought, I could share some of the stories, the warmth, that I had once reserved for them, with other children." I started volunteering at the library the following week. Reading to a small group of bright-eyed, eager children, seeing their faces light up at the adventures unfolding in the pages, brought a new kind of joy, a gentle healing. It wasn't a replacement for the family I had lost, but it was a reminder that love and connection could be found in many forms, in many places. My life was smaller now, in some ways, but infinitely richer. I had peace, I had friends, I had purpose. The ghosts of that Christmas Eve still whispered sometimes, but their voices were fainter now, drowned out by the gentle rhythm of the waves, the laughter of new friends, and the quiet satisfaction of a life reclaimed. I had driven 500 miles for Christmas, only to find my gifts, and my worth, in the trash. But from those ashes, I had built a new life, one founded on self-respect and quiet strength. And that, I realized, was the best payback of all.